Welcome to the first episode of this podcast. On today's episode, we have Lucas Pfeiffer, who is an amazing product designer based here in San Francisco, hailing from Mankato, Minnesota. Lucas has worked with teams like Art of Sport. I didn't see Angie's on there, but we've talked about how you work with that team, so we'll get into that. And then you've also been a co-founder of Line Mogul. And you're early product designer at, remind me, it was
Supply
Hound, and now first designer at Local Kitchens.
That's right.
Which is where we work together. And so I technically was your manager while I was there for a short while, but I think the thing that has stayed with me since my time there is that I feel like I've learned so much from Lucas during that time, and I feel like every single conversation we've had during that time and after that, I've left feeling like so energized about how you see things, like the future and everything. So you naturally, obviously, were one of the first people that came to mind as I thought about starting this podcast. So I'm just excited to dive into all of that. And I think hopefully people will take away something from this conversation as well.
Thank you, Melody. I'm excited to be here, and I've learned a lot from you as well.
All right, so let's jump into the first part, which I think we'll take it back to your time in Mankato. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about like what it was like growing up in Mankato and like what your early influences and experiences that shaped your personal values and worldview.
I was born in Mankato, Minnesota. It's a small town south of Minneapolis, and I had a really small town upbringing. We lived in the same house all 18 years of my childhood. A house my dad built. My dad owned a small HVAC business called Pfeiffer's Heating and Cooling.
Amazing.
It was a business that was passed down from my grandfather.
Oh.
So it runs in the family. My mom worked for the government, and they were terrific parents to me. They definitely instilled the Midwestern values in me, whether it was intentional or not. I played video games growing up. That was probably my introduction into technology.
Yes.
And I guess a couple things that stick out from my childhood, two stories that I think sort of do a good job of explaining who I am is, she said, I used to close my eyes in the car and say, Mom, can we stop talking? I want to use my imagination now.
Oh my gosh.
And I think I've always tried to be a curious kid, and I think that's just inherently who I am, and that's something that I see in myself as an adult. And I think the other thing is I'm generally an optimist. Before I wanted to start working on products and technology, the first thing I probably wanted to be was a construction worker. And I was inspired by a show called Bob the Builder.
Okay. Yes.
And my mom used to...
We love that.
My mom used to come back to the sandbox, and I was working in the sand, and she would say, he can't fix it. And I would say, yes, he can.
I love that.
So those are two things that probably described me as a child.
Curiosity and optimism.
Yeah, and I think I still try and tap into that. Yeah. I loved school. I really did. And took a wide range of classes from AP Calculus to AP US History. I really enjoyed school, but wouldn't have called myself a great student by any means. I never really fully invested my time into that, and would stay up late playing RuneScape with friends, and had hockey practice and football practice and golf practice and all those things. So had a very busy childhood, and then eventually moved out here to the Bay Area when I turned 18.
Yeah. And so how long have you been in San Francisco for now?
I first came to San Francisco in 2020. Okay. So this would be my fourth year, I think.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think I only heard little tidbits of like the RuneScape story, but I feel like it was such a big part of what brought you into technology. So I'd love to hear more about like what that was like and eventually how that drew you to tech.
Totally. So we had a Dell computer in my basement, this big Dell desktop, And I used to go down there.
With the internet beeps and...
Beep, beep, beep. Truly archaic. And I remember going and playing RuneScape. One of the first guys I played with was a friend of mine named Jimmy. We grew up playing hockey together. So we'd go to hockey practice, we'd come home, we'd, get online and we'd play RuneScape. We'd call each other on the landline telephone.
Amazing.
And we'd talk and we'd play.
Wow.
I was so early in my life that I didn't really wasn't even capable of really remembering a username. My first username was bed56001.
Bed56
it's just the first thing we saw, and then the area code of my hometown.
So Teapot 4678.
That's right.
Yeah.
Same thing. And we just used to play. It's where I learned to type. We used to, there was IRC built into the game.
You learned to type.
Certainly.
Through RuneScape.
Oh, certainly.
How old were you when you started playing?
Probably 6 years old.
Wow.
5 or 6, somewhere in there.
That's amazing.
We were very young.
Yeah.
And, we just loved it. It was a place where I could go and explore, and I would try things and it wouldn't work, and you'd make progress eventually. There was a fully functioning Grand Exchange, this marketplace of goods that players transact with each other and sell and buy goods, and there was merchants who were trying to find arbitrage opportunities in the market.
Yeah.
And
how would you describe RuneScape again, like the goal or?
Yeah, so it's an open world.
Okay.
I think they call them RPG MMOs or something.
Okay.
I don't know
MMORPGs.
MMORPG, whatever the terminology is.
Is it kind of like what Roblox is?
I guess I've never played Roblox, but
it's like a world
it's
building.
It's open world, and each character, there's no end to the game.
Yeah.
So each character kind of exists and has a life.
Yeah.
And you come back and log on the next day, and you go into the physical world and could run into people.
Okay.
And the real objective of the game is nothing.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of skills in the game, from rune crafting to woodworking to strength and range and mage, and you're trying to level up all your skills, gather resources, do all the quests in the game. So it's a very rich map where people go and fight different monsters and do group activities, and player versus player fighting and things of that nature.
Got it. And so you were 6 years old, how long was RuneScape a part of your life, and again, how did it kind of then bring you into tech? Like, what did you learn from this?
Certainly. I would say that we probably slowed down playing once we were 13 or so, middle school maybe, and I really started to switch gears. I played more Halo probably in that time period.
Yeah.
And this is when we started to do game battles and play competitive and things of that nature, and I really liked that as well. But sports became a really, massive part of my life, and I grew up in a sports family. My brother played football. The things I learned from my days playing video games though was another team sport that I really loved. So playing with other people was really, really an amazing experience. I have a lot of great memories from that. But also collaborating, right? You're working with teammates to go and do things. At a young age, I think it's a very formative experience to sit down with a friend and reason through what you're trying to accomplish and why you're trying to accomplish it, and to disagree on what the path forward is. And at a very young age, I was a part of a lot of teams, but that was one of them. And I really appreciated that. And then the more technical side was, as I started, I didn't know what username to put down for RuneScape, and then by the end of it, I'm like digging into the files to try and mod the computer and get a custom cursor, and you learn about file structure and, like I said, how to type and how to reboot your computer when it's not working. And that was my slow, gradual ramp to understanding a little bit more about what computers were and how they worked.
And so I guess moving from that then into hockey, that was like the big sport for you, right?
Totally.
And so, like, what did you learn from that experience, and what sort of values and what kind of impact did it have?
Hockey was a huge deal in my life. I still cherish, a lot of the memories and friendships that I built over the years playing. When I go back to Minnesota, I have friends who are, still coaching and playing, and to go back onto the ice with the kids is amazing. So I have a lot of great memories. But I think when I reflect on that period in my life when I was playing, it taught me a lot of really important things. And the first thing I would mention was playing on a team, and specifically a team that you really cared about.
Yeah.
At that point in our life, we had played, for a lot of years, and we took it pretty seriously, and we had these goals as kids, and we realized some of those goals and didn't realize some of those goals, and feeling what it was like to unlock experiences that necessarily going to be true was a really formative experience for me. Also realizing that certain doors closed and we didn't accomplish certain things, those were big experiences for me. It taught me about hard work. We really loved to work hard, and we got rewarded for it, and it taught me how to move my body and be active. I think that was one of the things I felt very lucky, and especially as I spend time here in the Bay Area, it becomes clear to me that not every child has a childhood where they're in an environment where moving your body is the norm. And we worked really hard and spent a lot of time sweating, and I still benefit from that time and knowing what it's like to take care of yourself and really try and be in good shape.
I guess like from that period of time, so we talked about RuneScape, we talked about hockey. Those were some of like the big, obviously there's a lot more to talk about there, but then talk me through the journey then. What were some of the sort of stepping stones that ended up bringing you fully into tech and then into the Bay Area?
So when I was in middle school or so, one of my really good friends growing up, Trip, his parents started a popcorn company. Angie was a nurse, Dan was a teacher, and they started popping popcorn in their garage. And we were kids at the time running around, the neighborhoods, being crazy. And they were putting in a lot of effort, trying to, figure out what they wanted to do. And eventually, they started popping popcorn and handing it out. They would package this popcorn up. It was only kettle corn at the time. They would bring it around to all of the Moondogs games. It was one of the local baseball teams in town. They would go to all of these different community events and hand out popcorn. Long story short, eventually they made a lot of progress and people loved their popcorn. Yeah. And they got a call from Trader Joe's, and Dan would send these little bags of popcorn to one of the people that worked at Trader Joe's, and they would put it in the lounge. And eventually she tried the popcorn, and she's like, we'll take some of it, we'll try it out, we'll pilot it. And it was a mad scramble to figure out how to make that come true and fulfill that order. But the rest is kind of history.
I literally have a bag like in my pantry right now.
Yeah, it's pretty surreal to see it everywhere. Yeah. But what we remember from those years was all the hard work. Angie and Dan were really amazing people too in the community, and to us kids, they were great people. Yeah. And they worked very hard, and to see them have success was really, really amazing. And to see the business evolve was really amazing. One of the big takeaways was what it meant to grow a startup and to grow a company from nothing. Yeah. And to see it really closely was a pretty formative and cool experience for me. And I knew there was something there that I was pretty excited about. Yeah. And they were obviously really great to me as mentors to really walk me through over the years, some of the decisions they had made and what it was like, growing the company. And that was a lot different when they were, getting started than it was when they eventually sold the business to Conagra. There was a lot of different challenges along the different stages of the business. Yeah. And to see the long evolution was really impactful and formative for me. And I think from that point forward, I really didn't know what my future looked like. Yeah.
This was in high school?
This was in high school. But I knew that was really awesome. I really loved school, and I was a very curious kid, but I also hated the too much structure. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, for example, even though I was interested in my own health and things like that, because I just felt like the path was too constrictive for me. And startups was this other path that was not that. And I didn't really know, what I knew now, but I knew that it was something that was appealing to me.
Yeah. And so how did you end up in this sort of world? Because you've been now in like the startup world, both like in tech and also in like CPG and other things. Yeah, tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so when I moved to the Bay Area, I was kind of splitting the difference, and I was spending some time at some CPG startups. You mentioned Art of Sport. That was a great experience for me.
Which is like Kobe, the Kobe. Right?
Yeah, so we were doing skin and body cares, Juju Smith-Schuster and Kobe Bryant. Yeah, Kobe's skincare company, and we were really trying to sell a healthier deodorant and shampoo and body wash product to athletes, a gap in the market, and we were in Brentwood, Los Angeles, so I really enjoyed going into the office every day. I was just doing what I could to be around startups and doing all of the scrappy startup things. But I also knew that CPG, I think I started to realize that CPG wasn't as appealing to me as something to really go and build a career into. And so I knew technology was, really exciting to me. And at the same time, I had been really trying to figure out what skills I could build to make my way into tech. Just started working on stuff and building stuff when I had moved out here, and eventually we started a company called Line Mogul. And Line Mogul's mission was to eliminate wait time at live events. So we were building a mobile ordering app and a point of sale system for really busy venues where people could see the wait time of each line, and then they could choose to skip certain lines. And so this was my path to kind of working on a bunch of different startups, but saying I wanted to sort of pick tech. And that's when I really started to double down on that.
And how long did you work on Line Mogul for?
So we worked on Line Mogul for about 3.5 years. It was a pretty...
Was it in San Francisco too? Or?
So we were a distributed group. Some of the guys were in Los Angeles. A couple were in Minnesota. And then I was out in the Bay Area. And so we're a distributed group, but we had events kind of all over the country as well. So we did the CrossFit Games in Wisconsin-Madison. We did some events in the Bay Area. We did some events in Los Angeles. We did some events in southern Minnesota. The real challenge we had was breaking into the merchants and understanding how big the point of sale market is. To be on feature parity with someone like Square is a really long list of things. So the point of sale market was really what we understood ourselves to go and be building a business into, and just struggled to make traction.
And what do you kind of take away from like that period of time?
One of the things I came away with was an appreciation for how much fun it is, even when you're not having success, to work on something that you really care about. So that was a big takeaway for me. And we have a lot of good memories. We didn't always make as much progress as we would have liked to. And I don't want to sell ourselves short either. We did make a lot of progress, but we didn't accomplish what we set out to accomplish. And then I also came away with an understanding of what it means to build a product organization. And if you're not able to build great product, and that's your business, it's really, really hard to have a path forward. And so that was another big insight for me. And just the level of committedness that it takes to go and make something from nothing successful. It's not something that can be done as a bolt-on fun project from my perspective. It really requires an immense amount of focus and sacrifice. I kind of understood coming out of that experience that it's definitely not easy work, and if I wanted to keep playing the startup game,
Yeah.
that's something that you're signing up for.
Yeah.
That has to be a part of what you're okay with.
100%. I wanted to, let's see, I guess doubling down on what you're sharing, like really believing the mission or the product that you're building, just in tech or even outside of tech today. What are you excited to see that's happening in the industry today?
Well, one of the areas that I spent a lot of time in from Lying Mogul was the payment space and understanding the point of sale space. And it's really exciting. I was at Stripe Sessions the other month and seeing Tap to Pay on the iPhone and going to the farmers markets and seeing, you put your phone up to their phone and you make a transaction. I think we take that for granted, and to see how payments have truly evolved over the last decade is pretty remarkable.
Like decreasing the friction for all these folks and what's possible then.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think we underestimate how much the little minutia and the friction in the sale has for a functioning and healthy economy.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about that space.
Yeah. And how Stripe is one player in this space.
Stripe is one player, and the point of sale market is really great for merchants. You can go and sell today much easier than you could in the past. Shopify is doing the same thing for online merchants and retail merchants as well.
Yeah.
So I really, really also, think things that fly under the radar, like Apple Wallet, we take them for granted. It's one of the applications that I would, be hell-bent to live without.
Yeah, I use the Apple Card now, and I think of you when
That's
I
awesome.
use
I
it. The immediate cash back, it is a very immediately gratifying experience.
They've done a great job simplifying the product.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
I think I say that in my work, what I'm really interested in is, how we interact with computers.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to define the field that I'm most intrigued by, that's it. And so I have the Apple Vision Pro and the Humane Pin and these things.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun to build more of an opinion on what the new paradigm of engaging with computers looks like.
Yeah.
And I think we're clearly in a very early stages of another big shift.
Yeah.
But it's really, really interesting to see how it's evolving.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anything is necessarily overly broken with technology either. My father, for example, didn't grow up with technology in his life, and he has an iPad now. And, it's really expanding his worldview. On the flip side of that coin, we have these iPad kids. And I think there's this big fascination in society with what kind of impact that's having on childhood development.
100%. Yeah.
And so I try not to make blanket statements about technology ever.
Yeah.
But what does feel true is that the tools are exceedingly becoming more powerful.
Yeah.
And it's going to require a lot of focus to design them in a way where they're serving humans and we're getting the utility that we want out of them. And to really be intentional while trying to minimize some of the externalities that are coming along with these really, really powerful tools.
Let's dive into that a little bit. So you mentioned all the new paradigms with computing, the Apple Vision Pro, the Humane Pin, but even like ChatGPT and chat interfaces, right? And like even with the latest GPT 4.0 and everyone's talking about audio interfaces, like just our interfacing with computing is rapidly changing. And so I'm curious, just like more of your thoughts on how these paradigms are shifting.
Yeah, ChatGPT is amazing. If I listed the apps that I use every day, ChatGPT would be up there with Apple Wallet.
The new entrance to your relatively new entrance to your daily tech stack.
Certainly. And ChatGPT is becoming an increasingly big part of that. I think for a minute I used it and was really intrigued by it, but then had a lull in my usage.
Sure.
That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
And I guess one big takeaway that I have, and I think it's a pretty big theme across these new devices actually, is that, and specifically for the Humane Pin and even a LLM like ChatGPT, it requires a certain level of intentionality from the user.
100%.
And it's very, very hard for people to know how to leverage their tools from my perspective. So Apple Vision Pro, for example, you sort of get immersed in this new environment, and you're in this VR headset. Things are happening around you, and you sort of get it.
Yeah.
However, the utility of the experiences today are pretty minimal outside of entertainment from my perspective.
Yeah, like how often are you using the Apple Vision Pro per week?
I'm not even using it weekly. I'm using it every, basically for research at this point.
Research or like novelty active user.
Someone's over and we want to explore, things like that.
Yeah. The Humane pin.
The Humane pin, I'm also not wearing every day.
Okay.
I'm definitely using it in a research capacity.
Okay. So maybe like even still maybe once a week.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So I'll put it on for a few hours and try it out.
Okay.
I've also done some extended usage to see how the hot swap battery system and things like that feel.
Yeah.
And what it's like to just carry these things on my daily person as I commute around the city and whatnot. But ChatGPT is there all the time.
Yeah.
It's in my iPhone. I think the iPhone is an incredible form factor.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful computer. And I use that in my MacBook Pro probably most frequently. Those are probably my most used computers today. One of the things that I noticed that ChatGPT and Humane Pin share is that it's really difficult to know how to use it. And especially with the Humane Pin, you have to know how to ask it questions. You have to know what sort of features exist.
Yes.
So taking an image of a restaurant and asking it for the reviews is a really, really cool use case for the pin, but it's one that's more difficult to discover.
Yes.
Now, I consider myself to be pretty immersed in this world, and I can't imagine what that's like for someone who, isn't familiar with technology. And similarly with ChatGPT, it's like it's very hard to know how to actively prompt it in a way that's useful and what domains is it better in than others. So anyway, I think that's changing over time as well, and I think there's some neat ways to design these tools that can help offload some of that work. But I also think that there's people with a slightly different vision, which is pretty oriented around just this problem, which is how can these tools sort of be always on and prompting us for how they can be useful to us.
Interesting.
And I think that might be a pretty big peek into the next real used hardware product, something that maybe doesn't require so much effort from the end user.
Interesting. So it's like a proactive sort of interface rather than simply a passive or reactive interface.
I think that's a pretty good way to describe it.
It's like this is a human interaction sort of principle. It's like recognition over recall. So it's much easier for us to kind of like pick an option or choose a path versus trying to prompt or figure out what the right way to like basically pull out the information from this
100%.
black box that has all this plethora of information that's there, but it's much harder to access that versus them presenting you with options.
100%.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add here is that I think we oftentimes get excited to say that something's going to kill the iPhone or whatever it is. But I really, really do believe that we'll use a wide range of computers in our life. And I think people will even have non-general purpose devices in their life more and more as toys and things that are sort of a physical artifact that doesn't do a lot. Maybe a dumb clock, so to speak.
You were saying single purpose.
Single purpose analog devices that are much more manual and not as rich in their functionality.
It's like focus is the commodity now.
Totally. But I think that will be paired with this family of devices, and I think there will be a moment in time to use the very powerful tool that requires more focus and might be closer to a MacBook Pro or a Vision Pro where you're trying to build software, for example, pared down to lifestyle devices, doing things like going and finding the sunset or going to the farmer's market and making payments as you navigate through the city. And I think it's oversimplistic to say that we'll use that device or this device. My view of the future is that we'll certainly be using a range of devices for different things.
This is so interesting to me. You're painting this vision, and I see it in that when you're in the device, you're on the same playing field as everything within here. Once you realize the entire world and environment is your interface, then you have these then you're using physicality to help. Like, you're not on the same playing field. Does that make sense? Like, you have your alarm clock, and you're interfacing with your alarm clock there. You have your, like, other artifact, and you're, like, interfacing with that single. But then, like, if you have your alarm clock and your note-taking app and, like, whatever, it's like everything's just within here, and you're all fighting for, like, one person's attention when they're using the screen. But it's like we're humans living in, like, a 3D environment.
Totally.
And it's like, if you just have more single purpose, like analog-ish sort of interfaces, then you're like, do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I guess to be clear, I wouldn't say that we'll use analog devices instead of, I think, these really powerful, closer to black box, general purpose devices.
Yeah.
But I think they'll be supplemental. And then I would say that we're not probably far from this reality today, which is a lot of people walk in their front door and they say to their HomePod, can you turn the lights on? And then they go up to their iPad to set a timer to boil the water.
Yeah.
And then they go on their phone to respond to an email.
Yeah.
And then they fire up the television, or someone's in the living room watching a movie on the Vision Pro.
Yeah.
And so I think we're already using technology in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting to see, like, an emergence of single purpose, still very extremely powerful tools, but, like, geared around, like, more single purpose use cases.
I think you might be onto something.
Yeah.
And I personally, as a consumer, one area of this is a writing device, right? Is there a device that's great for writing in the daylight that isn't the blue light display, where I can go to the park and I can not be surrounded by all these distracting apps and whatnot.
It's the focus is the commodity. Like, I feel like that's
Totally.
Yeah.
And you could argue that one device will solve that, and that moving from apps to agents might be a useful transition in helping people focus on their devices.
Yeah.
But I imagine that devices will always be rich and entertaining, and there will always be a source of distraction. Again, I think it will be a luxury as well to be able to have all these devices.
Exactly.
And I think in a lot of ways it's a luxury problem. Which is, if you're in the developing world, having a phone is your path to banking and having property rights and having a right to communicate with others in a private and secure way. And I think in a lot of ways we in the Bay Area in particular are caught up in certain lifestyle. We focus on our lifestyle as if it's the only lifestyle that exists in the world.
Yes.
And I think that
we love Andrew Huberman.
there's a lot of people in the world who aren't contemplating these things. But I certainly think there's a time and a moment right now where we have an opportunity to really reassess whether these devices are serving the best version of our life or not. I really feel strongly that it takes intentionality for us to go and design these devices and these products in a way that's serving the best version of the life that we want to live. And just to be clear, that's different for different people. And so something that I think a lot about is there actually a way to help people understand what their goals are and what their values are and figure out what technology helps them achieve those desires.
Yeah. And do you feel like that is something that's challenging for folks to, like, understand what the best version of their life is?
I think it's a pretty big question. And in a lot of ways, I don't even know if I know exactly what the best version of my life looks like. But as I'm sure you could relate to, life is just this constant exercise of reflection and action and self-actualization, and trying to figure out, as you gain more experiences in your life, figure out what feels good to you and what your values are and what's really important to you. And I certainly think that over time, the more you understand about yourself, it gives you a better shot at going in and leveraging the tools in a way that helps you. But it's hard to imagine not, reflecting on your life and having any idea how these things impact you. And I think one tangible example of this is someone who's scrolling a feed without being aware of it in a public setting, which I certainly have been myself and still probably do to this day at times. But there are moments in time where I probably think about it and say, was that how I wanted to spend that time? Maybe not. So I think there's a spectrum of these things. And I'm sure some of us are more aware of them in our lives than others, but it's not to say that there's any right answer for sure.
But I guess on that note, like looking forward out into, I guess, future of technology, but also in how we think about living our lives, what do you foresee are the challenges with the way that technology is trending? What are some of the potential pitfalls you see, or things that we can do as builders to try to be responsible in how we build?
Well, your point about focus, I think, is what comes to my mind first. I think helping people actively focus on what they want to focus on is a really powerful idea in today's world. And I certainly wish I was more focused in my day-to-day life. And so I think tools will increasingly help us do this, and certainly are the cause of some of our lack of focus. But I certainly think tools have an opportunity to be designed and built in a way to really help us focus on what we care about. I'm very passionate also about a citizen's right to technology, and technology that protects their data and their privacy, and how important that is as a principle to a functioning society and democracy and a free society. And I think that's actually not very commonly agreed upon in today's world, and I think there's a range of disagreements on the gray area in that conversation. Does it mean end-to-end encryption? Are people actually storing their data on device? There's a bunch of different parts of this discussion. But I think in general, having your ability to collect data and then use it as a self-reflection tool and something to build on your life with. So you can imagine asking an AI based on all my experiences, can you help me figure out what my values are? What are some of the patterns that you've identified in my life with all of this data where you realize that I'm not living the best version of my life? So I think self-reflection and helping people understand more about themselves is another big one. Exploring more of the world is another big one. I think tools helping us get out of our house and go. I always say Maps is base UI.
Maps is based UI.
Base UI.
Oh, okay.
Based UI too. This idea though that, and I love Maps. Maps is another great technology that I think we take for granted. It's really helping us go and explore new things and pulling on us to go explore those new things and be a part of other communities. And I think we feel a sense of isolation in today's world. When the car was invented, we started to branch out from our hometown further, and eventually the airplane and the Wright brothers happened, and we started to go to other towns, and it became more accessible to go to different countries. And today, travel is really ubiquitous, and it's really easy to travel the world to some degree. But I think even with that in mind, we still have a problem with isolation. We still feel the tension of going outside into the world. And even when we do, we go to the same places and we do the same things. And there's this friction to go and exploring the world that I think we haven't quite tapped into yet. That is a pretty surreal opportunity. And then connection. I think there's a big trade-off with a lot of our technology that has to come, that it's at odds with connecting with each other. And what we're working on at Local Kitchens is an example of this. The convenience market is really expanding. The food delivery is really expanding. And does that have to come at odds with human connection and having people sharing a meal together? I don't think it has to. It just requires some intentionality. And food is one vertical of connection, but there's a whole list of others. And I think asking how technology can actually help us connect is a pretty big question.
This is great, and I would love to now transition a bit. I mean, it's not even transition, but to build upon, you mentioned human flourishing. What does that vision look like to you, based on, focus, and you mentioned connection and exploration and energy, self-driving, like Waymos and all of that, and the innovations there. If you were able to kind of craft that vision or picture, like what does that look like to you? I guess it's almost like a summary of all of these things.
At a society level, I really hope that we're focused on very, very hard real-world technical problems, which is onshoring energy production. And I'm a big proponent of trade and what it means to trade with the world, but I think it's very important that we know how to source energy, and we have abundance of energy in our country, that we focus on technologies like satellite and connectivity. And so I think on a societal level, I'm really eager in healthcare, the idea that we can build really robust medical services throughout the country, food production, build food production that's healthy, and have a supply chain and logistics operation that gets it to the world without a bunch of plastics in it and whatnot. So I think on a society level, I'm really optimistic and hopeful that we'll focus on high tech things like chips. Can we produce the best chips in the world?
What do you mean by chips?
This idea, hardware chips, like for computers.
Okay.
It's like
I was like potato chips with no seed oils and
those classic Jensen chips. This idea that we wouldn't know how to do that with all these tools like ChatGPT at our fingertips now. It's becoming obvious how important that is to the future of the world. And underneath that is a bunch of maybe less sexy stuff, which is, these high-tech chip fabrication operations and chip design operations that are really important to the future of humanity. But all this is to say, I think that's one big bucket. Is we have to push progress, and we have to explain to the world, and particularly, the citizens that live among us who don't necessarily believe in that progress, on why it's so important for raising the floor and raising the ceiling at the same time. And so I feel really strongly about that bucket, which is a more societal level bucket. And then there's the more personal bucket, which is what we talked about. It's we all have a different set of values. Are we able to do the reflection in our life to understand what our values are, and then use our tools and resources to go and hopefully actualize the best version of that? And in that bucket, personally, focus is certainly a big one. I say I aspire to be maybe an artist and an engineer at the same time. And in order to do great work, focus is a prerequisite. And so I think I spend a lot of time trying to analyze how my days need to be structured in order for me to get a healthy dose of that.
And produce your best work.
Totally. And then there's movement. I always say one of the greatest privileges in the world is moving our bodies. And for me, I grew up ingrained in my life that moving my body and living an active life was very core to how I grew up as a child, and has remained a big part of my life up until now. And I think a lot of the work that I do, I end up in a sedentary lifestyle, and I don't always live probably the best version of my life in that way. And so it requires a lot of thinking on how I can spend more time moving, and how do I need to design my days in a way where I'm still moving. And so some examples of this is like taking Apple Notes and doing really long walks and doing some of my thinking and writing work in a more informal movement setting like that. Connection is another huge one. Connecting with others and developing a deeper and more rich relationship with people that I care about. I think over time, when you move and you change settings and scenery in life, whether it's job or city or whatnot, you realize that you're always building relationships with people, and it's a constant work in progress. Everything that I try and do in my life, I don't have a family right now or anything like that, but everything I do in my life is in service in a lot of ways, and me trying to develop a richer connection with the people around me. And I think very deeply about that now. And I think part of that comes from also doing some reflection on times in my life where that probably wasn't as much the case. Whether it's not, you're not working with the people. Once you work with someone who you're really excited to collaborate with, it becomes very clear when you're not doing that, what that feels like. Or when you have a really
there's that energy.
Totally. And when you have a really good friend, what it feels like to not have that. And maybe COVID in the period of isolation coming through COVID is what I'm thinking of here. But it made me understand how important it was to be out in the world and to not be in my home for large parts of the day. It became clear to me that that's a big value of mine, and it requires intentionality to go and design my day around these things. Am I going to choose to watch something or to go engage with someone else, or whatever example you want to pick?
What do you feel like has helped influence how you've thought about these things across like the sort of personal aspects? Like, are there people, are there books? Like, what are some of those influences that have helped shape how you think about these aspects?
Well, something that comes to mind is I feel really fortunate in that I grew up in the Midwest, and I still have a bunch of really strong relationships with people I grew up with in Minnesota, and it's a great check because I spend so much time around people here in the Bay Area and in Southern California, and it helps me understand that the value sets are different in the two places. And I'm not even sure that I'm great at articulating how different.
Sure, but you feel it.
But I feel it. And a couple of the things that stick out from my Midwestern upbringing is this idea that you're a part of a community. You need to add more value than you take. Movement was a big one. I grew up around athletes and people who valued that.
Not so much in the Bay Area.
And then in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, I've been really, really fortunate to meet a lot of awesome people like yourself, Melody, who have helped reinforce how exciting building things and designing things and creating things can be, and what it means to work on a small team trying to go and build something greater than yourself. Especially as I map back to all of the different paths that I could have taken in my life up to this point, I feel really really grateful that I have those things.
It's the two different value sets and getting to experience almost that full range across those two communities.
Totally. And it's a constant check-in. A lot of the things that I talk about on a day-to-day, I'll go back to Minnesota and I'll sound like a kook. I brought up the Apple Vision Pro at a hockey practice.
You brought it?
I went to
you brought it up.
I went to practice with the kids last winter. I brought up the Vision Pro and they were like, we don't know what that is. Probably a good thing.
There's some good B-roll that I have of you, of the revealing of it at
yes.
WWDC.
WWDC this year is going to be incredible, by the way. I hope. So, but I think vice versa. A lot of the Midwestern things kind of seem quirky here, and I'm just grateful for the difference, and I like to say my friends think I'm weird in both places, so
Yeah.
maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to be, maybe, right? Where you're a little quirky in both. This is awesome, and I think maybe with that, it's also thinking about, you mentioned all these things that you're excited about when it comes to all of these technologies. Like, what are ways in which you keep up to date with all these things? What should maybe other people be paying attention to kind of sharing this conviction?
Yeah, I think learning a lot about the past of this country in particular has been an incredible source of inspiration
Just
for
reading
technology
history
for me. The Wright brothers are a great example of this. I was reading the Grant biography, Ulysses S. Grant, and just helps you appreciate too what this country was like 150, 200, 250 years ago, and how dramatically different it was.
Yeah.
And then reading
the problems they were solving back then, what that
certainly,
lineage is.
Certainly. To Nikola Tesla and to people who are probably a little bit closer to our generation. And then into when I was really in high school and really sparking an interest was starting to read more about the entrepreneurs that are really special today, like Elon Musk, and understanding what their vision for the future was. That was always really interesting to me. Today I spend a lot more time trying to not be overly consumed in the day-to-day news and spend more of my time focused on reading these things that are more stable in time. I think there's a lot of noise and a lot of hype and a lot of people who are really excited about the future. And I think in a lot of ways, I try not to spend as much time on Twitter and whatnot and current events in general. And so companies that I'm pretty excited about, I follow and try and read their technical updates pretty closely. Like Humane, they just put out a paper about, or a small little essay about their the architecture of their operating system.
And you'll just be reading that.
Yeah, that's a great source of inspiration to understand, what their thesis about the future of hardware and computer interaction is one example. I think Apple is still very, very relevant, and so when they put out whatever they put out at WWDC, I think will be very important. Reading about all of the docs on spatial computing.
I feel like, and so this would be the encouragement, right, to the audiences to read these sorts of things and follow your curiosities and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't think I have it all figured out, but I certainly think that following your curiosity is pretty sage and wise advice that's been passed down to us from others, and I feel really good about that as a focus area.
And in terms of how can people then stay up to date with, I don't know how much you're writing, but it's just to keep up with how you're thinking about things, where can they find you?
Yeah, Twitter's probably best, and I'm excited to keep sharing what I work on, and over time, hopefully I'll have more to share.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucas. Thank you for being, you're the first guest on this podcast, so
Thank you, Angie. It was a wonderful conversation.
It was awesome.
I'm grateful to be here.